Okay, so those are the common things. And again, those would be the things that we would build with any of the plans as proposed. Some specifics about individual plans, because you're going to want to talk about which of these you like, and if you want to proceed with any of what we now have as 4 plans, or perhaps consider some hybrids or something different. Okay? So starting with Plan A, Plan A and Plan B are very similar in many respects. They are the ones that retain the most parking. Plan C pretty much takes out a good amount of the parking. Both Plan A and Plan B start with kind of the existing structure that we have out there today, which is parking on the one side, and then we've got that buffered bike lane, with the door zone buffer, and then a couple travel lanes and parking on the north. So generally speaking, it sticks with that same structure that's actually on the ground today, with the addition of the median, of course, at Jefferson. So that's what you see out there right now. Looking up past the high school, there's the parking, the buffer, the bike lane, eastbound lane, westbound lane, and parking on the far side. So we would stay with that on those westerly blocks. As you go on to the east, now we're east of Adams, the parking on the south side drops out because the road narrows. Again, that's what's out there today. And as we get up to Polk Street, the road narrows again down to 30 feet. So we would go to 11, the bike lane ends, and we go to 11-foot lanes with an 8-foot parking on the south side. Again, that's what's there today. The difference is we're starting to add in things like curb bulbs and various locations to help manage traffic. This is at the East City Park, where the crosswalk is, the raised crosswalk, again continuing that same cross-section, parking on the south, 2 11-foot lanes, all the way through Hayes. And stop here for a minute and talk about curb bulbs, these little guys right here, and curb extensions, some people call them. We have some of these in the community, and essentially what they are is an area where you take that curb line and you bring it out closer to the travel lane and then around the corner. There are a number of reasons to do this, a number of benefits. One is it does mark the end of the parking, so if you have a parking area, it does that. To me, one of the primary benefits of these is it brings that pedestrian from a location, normally they'd be back here, and if there's a car parked right here, the driver has a hard time seeing them. By bringing them out here, they're actually out beyond the cars, and they're much more visible to somebody in the lane, whether it's a bicycle or a vehicle, right? It shortens the crosswalk, so the amount of time the pedestrian's actually in the crosswalk goes down, and the overall narrowing of the roadway also creates a constriction so that drivers feel a little less comfortable going at speed, so again, they tend to slow down. So plans A and B both use these pretty heavily throughout the length. A couple examples, this is actually in the area of Lena Whitmore on the northwest corner of the school. There's a school there. You can see here where there's parking, there's a curb bulb that kind of shoots out from the original curb line, comes around a corner, and away you go. So you can see where you'd put that pedestrian out here rather than back here when you're trying to look past vehicles. Another example, same intersection looking to the north, you can see one on that side as well. And how much narrower the road section is for the driver as they're looking down the road section. So Plan A continues with that. We do pick up parking again about half a block east of Blaine because the road widens, and then we continue with that section, which is parking with the door zone buffer, bike lanes both sides, and travel lanes of 11 feet all the way through. When we get out to Mountain View, all of the plans go to a 3-lane configuration left turn pocket onto Mountain View with bike lanes, or well, I should say A and B with bike lanes on both sides. Okay, Plan B, very similar. The main difference here is that we change sides of the street for the parking in a number of areas. So again, we start out with the same general configuration. In this case, we're showing the wider median there at Jefferson. Again, the raised crosswalk, the same structure that we've got today out there east of Adams. And then as you get into the 30-foot wide stretch of the roadway, we've put the parking on the north side rather than where it exists today on the south side. So that does make some differences when it comes to things like transitioning out of the bike lane into the travel lane, because we do have to put the bikes in the travel lane here. That's why the sharrows, and that's what we do today. But it makes that transition a little better than Plan A. When you get down to the park, there's a little concern about putting parking up against the park side of the street because kids running around can't see them, ball comes out, you know, the usual story. So we want to avoid those kind of potential safety issues. In the area on the west end of the park, I felt the type of park landscaping here and the usage is very different than the other areas. There's a lot of vegetation. It's not where the kids are playing ball much, that type of thing. So having parking there maybe is a reasonable thing. But when you get to about midpoint on the park, it opens up. That's where the volleyball court is. A lot of the ball games and things happen. So moving parking back to the other side of the street was important. So what you see here then is a transition through the Lincoln intersection where parking is on the north side and then it drops down to the south side here. And so the street has to take this lateral jog. So you're driving along and you veer left to get to the new alignment across the intersection. It will look something like this. So you're coming along, there's parking on the left, which would be the park side, just like that one. Come through here, parking switches to the other side of the street, so you make this transition laterally. And again, it's called a chicane, but it's a feature that does create some traffic calming and slowing of speeds. In our case, as much as anything, it moves the parking away from the park in that open play area. And then we continue that section, parking on the south side through Hayes, past Blaine, and then we go to a 2-bike lane configuration, just like Plan A did. The parking starting on the south, but again bouncing to the north side at the Grant intersection. So we then carry that north side parking all the way through to where it terminates before we reach the Mountain View section. So A and B, a lot of similarities. They use curb bulbs extensively, I should say. They retain parking on at least one side of the street in the narrower corridor sections. They use bike lanes where we can, but in the narrow sections, they require bicyclists to take the lane. It's a shared use facility. Some folks aren't as comfortable with that because when you get into higher volumes on a street, shared use is, you know, there's some limitations there in how usable it really is. So Plan C then was kind of the next greatest generation of concepts. This is one that includes a 2-way separated bike lane system. And just zooming in here at the Jefferson Street intersection, we would have the 9-foot parking on the south with the door zone still that's out there today, a 12-foot travel lane, a center median of some kind, a 12-foot travel lane westbound, and then a 1-foot wide buffer. Remember the picture I showed you? It would have those vertical elements, the little curbs, and then the delineator pipes that are sticking up, and then 2 bike lanes going in opposite directions right there. So at this part of the corridor, they'd be 4.5 feet wide. The narrowest they reach is 3.5 feet, and I think we get up to 5 at their widest point. So it varies depending on street width. There is a loss of parking in some areas as we go along. A couple of shots of what these things look like. This is probably down in Portland, but similar kind of situation. We'd have a curb line, some width here, 3.5 to 5 feet to a skip stripe, another 3.5 to 5 feet out to the 1-foot buffer, then vehicular lanes out here with the little vertical delineators in there to help provide that message, if you will, to the drivers that like this is a border, this is an edge, don't go into this bike lane. A couple other examples of those, some of them are cross-hatched, not necessarily something we'd propose, but one of the things you see here is this green crosswalk. And that's the kind of thing that you'll see on the plans, particularly Plan C, along the bike lane. That green crosswalk is the symbol that's used to tell drivers that there is a bike facility crossing at this location. So when you're this guy coming up to the intersection, you got the normal crosswalk over there that's white, but out here there's a green crossing because you're going to cross a bike facility. So look for bikes along the way. That's really what that's telling you. This is one that may be very similar in size to what we're talking about. I don't know the exact scale on this, but just kind of eyeballing it, this may be pretty representative. And where we do have room on particularly the west end, there would be parking as the plan is proposed next to the buffer. Now, there's pros and cons with that. The one good aspect of it that people really like is, as a bicyclist, you're riding along here, this is an added protection between you and the traveling vehicle, right? Because they can't get to you through the parked cars, right? Some of the downsides are if you're traveling along here and this guy opens his door, then you have the risk of encountering the door. In our case, the bikes would be coming towards us in this lane, so they'd be facing the front of the car, and the passenger in the car would be facing them. So hopefully the visibility there is better than you might otherwise encounter, and you're less likely to have the conflict. But that is a potential issue. The other concern that can happen when you have parked cars along here is this line of cars provides you physical protection, but it also creates a visual barrier. So as you're approaching an intersection, if that happened to be an intersection right there, can the cars out here see you over here with a row of parked cars in between? So that's one of the downsides of this kind of arrangement. We do have this within Plan C. There are some areas where we could modify it and move that parking to the opposite side of the street. Other areas we have parking on both sides.